Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Research Capacity Development Unit, Faculty of Art, Design and Architecture, Introduction and Literature Review Workshop. My name is Relebohile and I'll be your moderator for today. Just a disclaimer that the session is recorded and the recording will be available on Moodle along with the presentation slides. Sorry, please allow me to just go through some housekeeping rules. Number 1, a feedback survey will be posted during the session. Please kindly fill it in and let us know where we can improve. Number 2, please mute your mics throughout the session so we can have a seamless session. Number 3, please raise your hands should you have any questions and the facilitator will give you a go ahead. The last one, questions can also be posted on the chat box. Please allow me to introduce our facilitator for the day by reading her short bio. Dr. Irene Brodner is a senior lecturer with the South African Research Chair in South African Art and Visual Culture in the Faculty of Art, Design and Architecture at the University of Johannesburg. Dr. Irene held a postdoctoral fellowship with the chair from 2016 to 2019. Prior to which she received her DLitt ETFil in 2016 from the University of Johannesburg. She has participated in the CAA Getty International Program and has been awarded a Y1 researcher rating from NRF and a University of Johannesburg Postdoctoral Research Fellows Excellence Award. She has published locally and internationally. Her research interests center on feminist new materialism in the visual arts with the focus on contemporary South Africa. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to you, Dr. Irene.
Thanks, Relebohile. Hello, everybody. I wanted, before I share my slides, to say hi and to ask who you guys are, because I'm not quite sure. Maybe you want to just quickly put in the chat what department or unit you're from. I mean, I understand you're all from FADA. None of the names I recognize. I tend to have more to do with visual arts and sometimes graphic design. So you are all new to make acquaintance with. And so please put your department in the chat. And then also, where are you on your postgrad journey? Because this is quite a broad workshop, and I'd really like it if we could be quite specific to your particular questions and to your needs. It's like, are you honors? Are you masters? Are you PhD? And also, are you doing your proposal, or are you writing your dissertation or thesis? There's rather a difference, and this workshop kind of is intended, I think, to speak to both. So let's just get a sense. Okay, hi. Fashion, interior design, masters. Okay, cool. Okay, writing your dissertation in your second year. Okay, right, in the throes of it, right. You're due to submit in October. Okay, and so the others, do put something in the chat if you're able or when you can. But we'll try to talk to everything. I have a presentation. It is not going to take an hour and a half. We have 30 minutes for questions, and I'd really like it if we could have questions from you guys, because let this be a session, like almost like a supplementary supervision session, where you can really like put up, maybe you can share your screen, you can put up text on the screen, something that you're working on, questions you have that you're struggling with. It is only as useful as your participation. I mean, personally, sometimes when I sit on these seminars, if I'm attending, you have them on in the background and you kind of listen and you don't engage very much. And that's also fine if that's what you're doing. But this really is a space where you can ask very specific questions. And while I can't speak to your subject matter, I can speak to the structuring. And this is what we're talking about today. Oh, and speaking about attending sessions, it would be very helpful. Like, I do appreciate it when people give feedback on workshops that I do. And I'm saying that as the kind of person who often doesn't give feedback on workshops I attend, that UJ form that comes up. I often don't fill it in. But if you do have any feedback to help make it better, or to consolidate something that you felt worked, it is very helpful for us. Okay. All right, let me share my screen. And let's begin. It's taking a moment here. Go. Slideshow. So there we go. Yes, as Rebel Healy says, I am with the Saatchi Chair in South African Art and Visual Culture. So I'm not actually based on in the Fada building. I come in for various things, but we are a separate research unit that focuses on research and supervision of postgrads. That's why you won't have really seen me around. Having just, I don't know if anybody has been trying to get their proposal in for this coming FRC date, which will be Wednesday, I think. I think if you are writing your proposal, you're in the throes of it. And if you are writing your dissertation, you are in the middle of that. Okay, if you are writing your proposal, let's just confirm. And even if it's a dissertation, you're going to be addressing each of these different areas. The context of research, which in your dissertation will be a lot like your introduction. The aims of the research, then if it's your proposal, it is a brief preliminary literature review. If it's your actual dissertation, it's much more in depth. Theoretical framework and research methods, proposed structure of your study, ethical considerations, and your application for ethical clearance, which these days is, in the last few years, it's become a lot more precise and involved. And your reference list, which you should be working on together with your literature review. This workshop is focusing on the context or the introduction and the preliminary literature review or the literature review. And at first I was like, oh, that's an interesting grouping. Why have they chosen to put those two together? But, having just gone through all of my master's students who are submitting recently and thinking about the feedback that they're getting, there's a lot of confusion, specifically between how you write your context or your introduction and how you write your literature review. So it's a really good way to bring them together. And we are going to actually look at a comparison before we look specifically at each one and with examples. So the slideshow is very text heavy, but you're right, there is very text heavy, and it's not helpful to give too many generalizations. It's helpful to actually look at the way text is structured. But for now, okay, so if we're comparing your literature review and let's just call it the introduction or the context of research. So your introduction, it introduces the main text or case study to the readers. On the other hand, the literature review critically evaluates and provides an overview, capital letters, of the existing research on the selected research area and identifies the research gap. So it's doing two things. At master's level, the originality of your study is not as important, but particularly at PhD level, it's critical. You won't get a proposal passed. You won't be able to do a project if you can't really show that you are contributing to new knowledge. And you do that by showing the gap, what has not been done. This has been done, but that hasn't been done. This has been done, but not in this way. And some people think that the originality statement needs to go in the context of research, but really it's an overriding principle of the literature review, because by showing all the different sources that are available, you're then pointing towards the gap. So those are the two things for the literature review. And even if you're at master's level, it's still really good to structure it towards a maybe partial gap. So the other thing about the introduction, it has central elements such as the background of the study, you could call that the context, the outline of the key issues, the dissertation or thesis statement, the aim. Obviously, in a proposal, there's a whole separate section for aim. But when you're writing your context and when you're writing your dissertation, you are still writing and introducing with your aim in mind. Your purpose statement and any key definitions. So, for example, say you are looking at the trace in your own artwork and those by two other artists. You need to define the trace in the context of review. Say you're looking at a particular element of post-colonial or decolonial theory. The definitions come in the context, not in the literature review. Students often put definitions in the literature review because that's when they're looking at the literature. But think that your context or your introduction is about concepts. It's about introducing the case study. The literature review is about the texts themselves. So while you might quote texts in the introduction, the text itself takes center stage in the literature review. Do we see the distinction? So in the context, looking at a concept that comes out of a particular book is not the same thing as foregrounding the book and its key issues. So the literature review goes in depth into the literature. And obviously, the more in depth it is once you're writing the dissertation itself, master's level or a PhD. I saw someone is writing a proposal at master's level. Your literature review then is not too extensive, but it's still an overview. You're still demonstrating you've seen the critical literature in your field for your particular subject. It's not helpful. So, for example, let's see, say you are, I mentioned the trace, okay? Who was the first person who really took the concept of the trace and applied it in the field of semiotics? That was Peirce and de Saussure, way back in the early 20th century. You need to have a text by them. You can't have you can't say I'm relying for my definition of the trace on a little journal article that's about the work of some artist that mentions the trace and they refer to the original definition by de Saussure and I'm quoting them third hand. That's not what you do. So the literature review is really a detective project in many ways. Are you looking at the reference lists of articles that you're reading? They quote an author. You go to their reference list, you find that text, maybe it's a journal article you can find online, maybe it's a book. The library has a really great selection of ebooks these days, but you'll also go and get it out. If it's a classic, the library will have it. You go to the primary source. Write that down. I hope everybody's writing something down. Go to the primary source. Okay. So the literature review has summaries, reviews, critical evaluations and comparisons of selected research sources. So to recap, the context or the introduction introduces the subject, and the literature review introduces the texts that you will rely on. When we say it, it sounds simple, but students really do confuse these differences. So for example, here, interaction time. I want you to please read this. Let's read it together. These are the next 3 slides I've lifted from one PhD proposal that we recently supervised. I've lifted sections from the context of research and sections from the preliminary literature review. I'd like you to think which is which. Okay. So on the left, there's a little paragraph. Although there is a plethora of magazine articles and newspaper exhibition reviews, surprisingly for an artist of his stature, very few monographs have been published about Prella, while other major 20th century South African artists, Anton van Veur, Irma Stern, Maud Sumner, Walter Battis, Gerard Sekoto, and Eduardo Villa, all generated a significant body of literature during their lifetimes, and or soon afterwards, the only significant monograph on Prella appears in the 21st century, 34 years after the artist's death, and that would be Esme Berman and Carl Nell produced a 2-volume deluxe monograph, Africa, the Sun and Shadows and Collected Images, to coincide with the opening of the major retrospective exhibition of the artist's work at the Standard Bank Gallery in Johannesburg. Okay, and then on the right, in his introduction to the catalogue to the second Johannesburg Biennale, which occurred early on in the democratic era in South Africa, Akwe Nzo writes of the need to build, quote, contact zones, unquote, where, quote, productive and lasting exchanges between artists and intellectuals across cultures, economic positions, and political affiliations, unquote, can take place. Is the legacy of a work like Discovery just too problematic, or can it become a productive contact zone? The curators at the Javid Art Center seem to think it can, as one of the aims stated in their catalogue exhibition is to set up, quote, conversations, unquote, as indicated by the title of the exhibition, through public engagement. And to this end, they selected what they called evocative works that, quote, transcend the immediate moment and subject into a larger context. Okay, so which one is from the literature review and which one is from the context of research? Guys, because I'm sharing my screen, it's not as easy for me to see the chat. So it'd be really helpful if somebody just said something. And I can wait through awkward silences. Nothing? Oh. Okay, so say one is from the literature review, one is from the context of research. If we're being very literal, they both reference literature, right? The second one references Akwe Nzo, the curator. The first one gives a real breakdown of various monographs that have been published about significant South African artists. There's a very clear difference in emphasis, though. Can you see the first one is from the literature review, the second one is from the context or the introduction. The first one is gearing towards the gap. It's saying that there has been a lot of magazine articles on Prella, this artist, but there have been very few monographs. There have been monographs on all these other artists, but there was only one monograph on Prella. The author is working towards her statement of originality, like why her study is going to be valuable. She's summarizing the literature on the left. She's providing an overview in this little extract, an overview of monographs on the artist's work. So the one on the right is the same author, the same student from the same proposal, except she's now talking about the work itself that she's examining, Discovery, this work by Prella. And she's introducing key questions through reference to sources. The sources themselves are not taking center stage. It's the ideas in the sources. Yes? Okay, let's do another one. Is this from the introduction or is it from the literature review? So here's an extract on the left. I will examine their applicability to discovery within the frameworks of current art historical discourse. Hurwitz argues that a post-colonial or post-post-colonial critique of the national life of a colonial state is still relevant because the art, and I would argue the art historical discourse, produced in the second decade of the 21st century in such states is, quote, still very much embroiled in national disaffection and sometimes violent cultural politics, unquote. While some visitors to the center applaud the work's relocation, the appearance of discovery in public has not been met with universal acclaim. Okay. Then on the left, here's another extract. Although well-researched and well-written with lavish reproductions of works in color, Berman, who was a close personal friend of Preller and who therefore is a source of valuable personal anecdotes and primary research, is an old-school art historian who chooses to take no cognizance of the theoretical turn in art historical discourse and her conventional biographical narrative methodology leaves the terrain open for other more analytical and theoretical approaches. Given that Volume 2 is a partial catalogue raisonné, the amount of space that can be devoted to any one work is necessarily limited, and in Nell's own estimation, which was the student's personal correspondence with him, the catalogue raisonné is intended as a framework for future reference. Okay, so which is the context or the introduction and which is the literature review? So the context of research would be the first one on the left, and the literature review would be the second one on the right. And how do we know this? Okay, so obviously in the first one on the left, it's going more into the case study, giving a context to the case study. It's interweaving reference to the national life of a colonial state, but the Hurwitz source is not being introduced as the main topic. It's the ideas in the source that are being woven into the context of this case study, this artwork discovery. On the right, this is very valuable. Look at the way the student has also introduced the limitations of an author. So Berman, I don't know if you know Esme Berman, you may well have come across her at school, in secondary school. Her approach is, as the student says here, very old school, but you're not saying, her work is completely outdated. You're not saying it in a nasty way, you're saying it in a scholarly way, and you're saying the limitations in a way that, again, points towards your contribution. So here, just as in the first extract, it's not only that the student here is introducing the literature, everything is geared. You see how the language is geared towards seeing the gap that exists in the literature. So here, there is one catalogue of the artist's work, is what the student is saying. But because it's a big catalogue, there's only a little bit that's written on every work. So already the student is going to contribute by writing more on these works. It is she's building on existing research, but Also, she is going to be working differently to the research that does exist out there, because a major source is an old school art historian, you know, who only provides a narrative, a biographical approach, as opposed to a theoretical approach. Let's just check. I think someone hasn't got their mic muted. I can maybe do that. Maybe Rupahili, you can just zap somebody. Sorry, guys, because I'm sharing, it's not as easy to see.
No problem. No problem, Doc. I'll assist you.
There we go.
All right.
Right. Okay, let's do one more now. So we're seeing here how the text itself is geared towards showing the gap in literature and providing the overview of the literature that exists on the topic, right? And in the context of review, we are seeing how the case study itself is introduced, how the background to the study is established, the history, maybe if it's an artwork or if it's an idea, everything is introduced, terms are described. Okay, so let's do one more. Is this the introduction or is it the literature review? In this thesis, I intend to explore two contexts of South African artist Alexis Preller's painting, The Discovery of the Sea Route Around Africa. First, the context of the work's original production, essentially in private at the height of the apartheid era in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And second, the context of its reception after its recent relocation, very much in the public in the democratic era in South Africa in 2019 and ongoing, and attendant ideas of Africanness in both contexts. So for the second extract, Preller's idea of Africanness has most often been considered in essentializing terms, using the romantic and exoticizing adjectives listed above when trying to describe the supposed continental mystique that Berman and others identify, other than announcing that he, quote, located his African form, quote, in the increasingly stylized figures of the Ndebele-speaking women he depicted from the mid-1930s. Berman does little to explore how he conceived of this Africanness, what purpose it served, and how it is manifested its work in different ways at different times. Understanding this exploration of Preller's work in relation to the earlier Highveld artists is central to my research project and is intended to be the first of my original contributions. Okay. So at extremely face glance, both of these extracts are talking about understanding the Africanness of this artist Preller, but the emphasis on in each section is clearly different, right? So in the first section extract, that is from the context of research or the introduction, it is clearly introducing the case study. In the second section, it is again geared towards exploring the gap. It is focusing on what we saw the author Berman from the previous extract. Here it's saying, look, she has not actually addressed this. There is a gap in literature. We can look more deeply at how he understood and explained what was called his Africanness. Okay. So the second focuses on the texts themselves, and the first focuses on the case study. If you're writing your proposal at a master's level or at a PhD level, I'm going to focus on masters because I see that there were some master's students in the room. Okay, so there are some just very clear-cut requirements by the FHDC. So, you know, that's the Faculty Higher Degrees Committee. Proposal will serve there. Your supervisor or supervisors will suggest a reader. But you could get someone who is from a completely different discipline, even from a different department. So there was someone in interior design is reviewing the proposal of someone in visual arts. It's very different paradigms. So there's or often suggestion of someone who one thinks is going to be sympathetic to the project, who's going to be able to offer valuable feedback. The context, the introduction in your proposal, it's about 1.5 to 2 pages. To be honest, sometimes it goes a bit over, but more than 4 pages, no. Okay. Its primary focus is to identify what you are exploring and to explain why this topic is worth exploring. Indicate how the study addresses a gap in existing literature and discourse, placing particular emphasis on the proposed study's original contribution to the discipline if it's towards a doctoral degree. And I don't know, it didn't look like there were any students in the room whose study has a practice-based component. If you were doing like a 50-50 master's where you are producing a body of work and you are writing a dissertation, then in the proposal, it's not just about the dissertation, it is about the practical body of work as well. That is also introduced. So historically, the gap in the literature is explained in the context of research and in the literature review. It's explained more in the literature review. So in the context or in the introduction, it's introduced. The originality is introduced. Oh, sorry, I was sick. I still got a cough. So if we're going to give another example, don't worry too much about the topic here. Look at the structuring of the language. Okay. So this is another visual arts. This is a master's student that I was involved with a few years ago. So my examples are mostly from visual art. But I think that, as we said, the structure does carry through. So the focus on this research is on how language and cultural difference have influenced the manner in which knowledge and memory is passed down across 3 generations in my family. I use the relationship between my mother, my grandmother, mother, and myself to explore the impact of migration and cultural hybridity on my understanding of intergenerational intersections. This will serve as theoretical grounding for my art practice. So at the Saatchi Chair, we will often suggest that your first paragraph is almost like a personal introduction, your relationship to the topic. If you're doing the kind of study that does draw on your own experience, it's really good to open with that example. If you're doing a topic that isn't personal, it's still really good to open with a description. Maybe you are making a particular prototype. Maybe you are exploring a particular subsection, subculture. Introduce that subculture with an example. Include even an image, which might be in text or it might be as an appendix at the end of your proposal. In your dissertation, if you're writing a dissertation, the same applies. It's just in a longer format. So here we see the student will then introduce some family history in a paragraph beginning. My grandmother was born in Zavala in Mozambique, blah, blah, blah. If you look at that first paragraph, the student has very clearly linked the personal, which would be the relationship between my grandmother, my mother, and myself, to explore a theoretical idea, cultural hybridity, and an event, an occurrence, the impact of migration. And then it's tied to the art practice because this was a 50-50 visual art degree. Okay, so the case study should be explained and there should be a clear link made to the theoretical framework, the literature that will be drawn on, the ideas that will be drawn on in order to illuminate the case study. I'm sure your supervisors have said to you what, how, why. Always think about that when you're writing. In order to what end? So the student here, she introduced her personal story. And then the next paragraph, after my grandmother was born in this, and then she moved to South Africa with her mother and blah, blah, blah. Here's the relating to the theoretical idea. In light of the context of my upbringing, I will suggest how photographs and objects can become vehicles for what Marion Hirsch termed post-memory. So that's a concept, post-memory, Marion Hirsch's concept. She's linking it clearly to photographs and objects from her migration from Mozambique to South Africa. Now, why? To what end? Okay, there's no to what end yet. Here's the to what end. I intend to use these photographs in my studio-based research by formulating critical visual responses that pay homage to my family's traditions. So that's the to what end statement. And then she also is going to have a comparison of her works to ideas by works by this Kenyan artist, Wanja Kimani, which is then explained. So do you see the scaffolding? Description, introduction, linking to a theoretical idea or concept that's going to frame her study, the emphasis on why she's doing this, to what end has she made these links, what will be the outcome. It will be a dissertation that examines something. It will be a creative body of work that examines something. Yeah. So on the other hand, that's context, that's the introduction. This is a model for how you can do the introduction to your dissertation as well. It's longer. Your literature review. So if it's a proposal, 1.5 to 2 pages for master's degrees, so it's the same length as the context. And 2 to 2.5 pages for doctoral degrees. They often do go over, but not too much. Don't waffle, don't repeat yourself. So this is what students ask. They say, I don't know what to write in the context, I don't know what to write in the literature review. I'm repeating myself. You're not repeating yourself because the emphasis is different. You might have introduced quotations out of key text in the context, but in the literature review, the focus is the texts and how the texts can group together. Okay, so the preliminary literature review, that's in the proposal. Its primary focus is to identify what you are exploring and to explain why this topic is worth exploring. Indicate how the study addresses a gap in existent literature and discourse, placing particular emphasis on the proposed study's original contribution to the discipline or field if it's in towards a doctoral degree. If your study has a practice-based component, include discussion of your practice-based work, revealing how it is linked to or supported by your theoretical study. So we looked at the student who is going to be looking at photography, photographs and objects as vehicles of post-memory to explain migration and cultural hybridity. Okay, that was part of her context. In her literature review, she's going to have 3 sections. 1, memory, 2, hybrid cultural identity, and 3, literature on Wanja Kimani, the artist that she's looking at. So look at the language that she's now deploying. A common thread in both Wanja Kimani's work and my own is the theme of memory. Theory around memory is vast, so to focus the study, I will examine authors who deal with memory in art and family photographs. Okay. You always having to funnel. I am using semiotics. I am looking at decolonialism. These are huge fields, particularly in a master's. One of the principal things that your proposal will be evaluated on is its feasibility. Are you able to do this project in what amounts to 18 months? Because you probably take 6 months to get your proposal in. You have 2 years to do it. University, really, they don't like you to go past, right? So you need to be able to do this in 18 months. Is the proposal a roadmap for your project to complete within 18 months if it's a master's degree? So it's very important that you do things like this. You acknowledge the broadness of the field because you don't want to come along and say, these are the 2 important texts. And it makes it sound like you're not aware that it's a big field. You haven't made clear how you selected those texts. Like, frankly, come on, I know a lot of you will go onto like EBSCOhost or even onto Google Scholar. You'll just pull the first 2 texts you see on a search. It'd be like, these are the texts I'm using. That isn't an informed choice, right? You might look at those texts and you see this one is not really a primary source. It's just rehashing stuff. This one is, it's just like a little magazine article. It's not a scholarly journal. What is central to your project? So memory is a vast field. It doesn't only encompass visual art, which is where the student was located. Memory studies reaches across literary studies, historical studies, sociology, everything. So she hasn't tried to summarize the field of memory studies, because it's not relevant for her project. She acknowledges the broadness of the field, and she immediately hones in on artists who deal with memory in art and family photographs. She's already said she's looking at family photographs. So then your literature review is not just a list. It begins as a list. Please let it begin as a list. Figure out which is the most relevant to your topic. But then you have to create paragraphs out of this. So this, for example, is how this student has started her section on memory for her master's. To explore how knowledge and memory is passed down from one generation to another, I refer to Marion, there's a typo there, Marion Hirsch's The Generation of Postmodernity, Writing and Visual Culture After the Holocaust from 2012. Although Hirsch's theory of post-memory focuses on the Holocaust, it is nevertheless useful for discussing displacements, as it refers to the idea of memories that are passed down to a generation that did not experience them immediately. And it describes how a second generation can inherit cultural or collective traumas through objects, images, and narratives that are passed down within a family. So she has summarized the texts relevant to her project. She hasn't just summarized it. She's summarized its relevance to her project. And she has chosen 3 themes here. We saw the beginning of the context of research on the previous slide. In your literature review, for your proposal, you'll be working with your supervisor to get sections. And there are different ways that those sections might be created, which we're going to see now. Thematic is the advice which I always give personally to students. I supervise students mostly within the visual arts field, but a thematic grouping works really well. I think key ideas that are mentioned in the context need to be able to be slotted into the literature review. So like previously I gave the example of, say someone is using the trace. There has to be literature on the trace in the literature review. And simultaneously, if you have a section in the literature review that has no mention in the context, that's a problem. So we see here, memory, hybrid cultural identity, and literature on Wanja Kamani, the artist. All of those came up in that extract that we saw from the context. Each section has to speak to each other in your proposal and in your dissertation itself. So while we are talking about the introduction and the literature review, anything that is in your theoretical framework, for example, is going to be referred to in your literature review. With the student here, she had a post-colonial framework, okay, that encompassed hybrid cultural identity, Helmi K. Baba's, like the location of culture, looking at the formation of identity in a time of migration and displacement, in sort of the third space. if she's examining an artist, all the literature on that artist needs to be shown to have been acknowledged, that you have a picture of what has been written on that artist. Even if at master's level you're not trying to do something original, you need to show you understand what has been written, because your scholarly contribution, your scholarly project is always in conversation with existing literature. That's the big jump from undergrad to postgrad. You are creating a project that you are seeing through. You get real project management skills, yeah? But you are creating knowledge. Whereas at undergraduate level, sometimes not necessarily always, but predominantly at undergraduate level, the focus is on you just gathering knowledge, filling up your tank. At postgrad level, the big shift, not just that you're having to carry a project as opposed to, to suddenly be able to write an essay the night before or start an essay a few days before. This is an 18-month project that you're having to keep at like a job. This is a job, yeah? You show up for work every day, whether or not you feel like it. You are carrying the project through over time and you're making a scholarly contribution. Whereas at undergraduate level, you consume scholarship. At postgraduate level, you are producing scholarship. And in the literature review is where that all comes together. So if we are summarizing the key characteristics of a literature review, and this is what I have seen over and over again, students struggle with. So if there's one slide that you're going to write down, yes, the slides are going to be available, but please just write it down, make notes as we're speaking. It helps you to internalize. Okay, so the key characteristics of a literature review, it is an overview. What is it an overview of? It is an overview of the key literature in the field. If this is a master's degree, at least 10 to 15 texts or sources. The focus is on the texts themselves. They will be grouped according to the concepts in the text. Like we saw in the previous slide, memory texts are grouped together. Literature on the artist is grouped together. But it is the texts themselves that are shown to be valuable. In the previous slide, we were seeing how the student was carefully delineating the limitations of the existing literature. So, that there was this, there was a key text by this author, but it's very outdated. And this is how it's outdated. And therefore, this is how my contribution is new. So in the literature review at PhD level, it's essential. At master's level, it's desirable that you demonstrate your contribution, your scholarly contribution to new knowledge. And it's also called finding the gap in the literature. It's also called originality. And you do this by positioning your research question in relation to existing literature. If you say, I have such an exciting project, I am going to create eco-friendly fashion products through using recycled materials. You've said this in a void. What else has been done on the topic? And why is your contribution worth doing? Remember, the FHDC, the Faculty Higher Degrees Committee, is looking not only that your project is feasible, that it's doable, but that it's worth doing. Why should the university support you to do this? Why should your supervisor, why should the resources of the university be put at your feet? It's not just that you're paying your fees, guys. We are all contributing towards a scholarly project here. So if your study is relevant, if it's going to be answering a need, maybe that is a real world need in industry, in society, maybe it is a scholarly need. Often those intersect. Okay. So what the literature review is not, it is not a summary. So it is an overview, it is not a summary. It is not an in-depth introduction of just one or two texts. It is an overview of key literature, at least 10 to 15 texts. You often group them together. You know, so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, wrote valuably about Memory's relationship to South African apartheid era photography. You're not just going to write a whole paragraph on one author, one text, one book that's relevant. It's an overview. Okay. You're focusing on the text themselves, not on concepts or ideas with attendant quotations. So in the literature, you position your research question in relation to existing literature. So it is not a summary, and it's not only a literature review, it's also a statement of originality. It is also a motivation for your contribution to new knowledge. So the literature review is not only a literature review, it is structured around your contribution to new knowledge. Okay. If you are right at the beginning of your proposal journey, maybe you have been working on your aim and your context with your supervisor, and now the supervisor says, go write your literature review. Go talk to the librarians. Go talk to Yvonne. Yvonne is a great resource at the Fodder Library. But she can only help you if you take very specific questions to her. You can't wander in and say, I'm doing my master's in graphic design. I need some sources. She's going to give you very generic sources. But if you give a very specific set of keywords, a research question, she can be a lot more helpful. Okay. So if you're starting from scratch, the first thing you need is to confirm your research question or your aim. They work together often. You refine your aim and your question as you see what's out there in literature, but you need to start with something. You got to it's like when you're pumping water. You got to put some water in to get something out. Okay, so step 2, you search for the literature using various bibliographic tools. I'm interested in how many of you have actually been to the physical library at Fodder this year. Please do remember that the physical resources of the library remain significant, that you want to get books out. Don't just rely on Google Scholar, on EBSCO, on finding journal articles. Journal articles are often derivative. Your contribution as a master's or as a PhD student is often in line with a journal article. You're synthesizing knowledge, not necessarily contributing key original knowledge. A lot of the original sources you're going to need are going to be books. That's where all articles draw on. When you use online searches, also be sure that you are using accredited sources, please. Get into the UJ Library portal. Get onto the website of major academic publishers like Taylor and Francis. Use EBSCO. Don't just type into Google. It's like I've noticed increasingly really since COVID, how, in the last few years, how students sometimes have almost like, very lightweight, even conspiracy type websites to explore particular questions. There is a wealth of scholarly literature that is also accessibly written. Don't use an encyclopedia. Don't use Wikipedia. Those sources rely on the actual sources, the key original texts. So those are what you want to to find. Remember I said that it's a bit like detective work. You might read an article that has an interesting idea. Who said that idea first? You want to go to the primary source. So now you have found some primary sources. You've found some relevant sources to your research question. Now you're reading these sources in order to identify the gaps in the literature. Eventually, you are going to create the structure of your literature review. You're going to find sections. So there, like we said, there are different ways that you might thematize or sort of structure your literature review. A thematic structuring is one that is usually favored at FADA. And so it's very likely that is what you are doing, what your supervisors are recommending. But you could also have different structures, like a theoretical one, a chronological one, methodological one. Often within a thematic structure, you are going to follow a chronological format. You're going to start with what was first written up to the most recent scholarly developments in that particular field. Like, remember that student was looking at memory. She might structure it chronologically, or she might structure it thematically. She was structuring it thematically. She said, I'm going to look at post-memory. I'm going to look at something else about memory. I'm going to show you an example now where it's a thematic structuring, but within the thematic structuring, it's quite chronological. You have to find a way to organize the ideas and to let the text take center stage. So what you've done at then, you write it. Probably you make many drafts. This is one of the things about your postgrad journey. You draft a lot. Usually at undergrad level, you write an essay. Maybe the lecturers give you the opportunity to respond to comments and then to rewrite the essay. But usually just one essay done. Next essay done. I know, I always tell students, I did 7 drafts of my master's proposal because I have the final one saved, draft 7. I have a student who's just submitted now. She did 9 drafts of her proposal. And so the students here who have joined us, who are in the middle of their dissertation, they know you go through multiple drafts, multiple rounds of corrections. It's not an indictment on you. It's part of the process. You are producing original knowledge, or at the very least, you're producing something that's a substantial project. It doesn't just happen, and it doesn't happen at the last minute. You draft a lot. Okay, so this is an example that we're going to look at from a different student, another PhD student of your literature review. Here, the student divided her topic into 3 areas. And it's just, so there is no real introduction to the literature review, especially in the proposal. Remember, you've got a word count, but you have to, well, it's sort of like please keep it to about 2 pages. You don't want to give your reader a 30-page proposal. They are going to get grumpy. You got to keep it to the word count. So the introduction needs to be, so this student was doing a project, a PhD study that looked at curatorial strategies around depicting sexual violence. The literature pertinent to the topic can essentially be divided into 3 areas: literature on curating and art histories, texts on socially engaged art, and writings on sexual violence and its representation. If you haven't already, talk to your supervisor about how they see your topic naturally dividing itself. You will also find, once you start reading, that there are natural divisions that arise. I have to know about this area. I have to know about this area. I have to know about this area. Sometimes it is a historical section. Sometimes then it's a theoretical section. but not necessarily. Okay, so we're just going to look at a little bit of the language, not necessarily the whole section nor the whole literature review here. But look at the way the language is expressed. Because sometimes you say, well, how do I write the literature review? These are the kind of phrasings. This is the way you group things. Okay, and remember, look through the subject. The subject about curating sexual violence, that's not your subject, but the way the student has structured it can be helpful to you. Existing literature. So there we go, already. Overview, what is in the field? Existing literature is focused primarily on the role of the museum and the curator within curatorial practice. Okay. Actual curatorial strategies tend to be embedded within these discussions of contemporary curatorial thought, rather than taking center stage. How are you finding the topic? Maybe you don't have like a book that's on your subject. Maybe the knowledge is woven into other topics. That's what the student has indicated here. Specific curatorial considerations relating to the topic of sexual violence or the effect of the global moral reckoning as affected by Me Too are not yet available in critical literature. Students often say that, hey, they say, my topic is so new and relevant and recent that there is no scholarly literature on it. People are posting on TikTok and Instagram, but there's no scholarly literature. You have to demonstrate that there is no scholarly literature. You can't just say, there's no scholarly literature. You have to prove there's no scholarly literature. You prove that there is literature on this, which is adjacent to, it's related to. There's literature on that, which is adjacent to, but not exactly. But there's no literature on this. So remember, in any kind of scholarly project, and you'll know this from writing essays in undergrad, everything has to be substantiated. You can't just make a claim. So you substantiate it. What is and is not available in scholarly literature. The phrase the student used here is critical literature, scholarly literature. Okay. So here you can see the student has now adopted a chronological approach within a thematic section. She's starting in the 1990s, then she's talking the reader through what is available on South African curatorial, just on here, it's just on curatorial studies through the 20th century. Look at the final sentence. The final sentence, always think about that as bringing it back to the relevance to your topic. She says here, both these texts will be useful in identifying recent changes in curatorial practice. To what end? Please write that down. To what end have you selected this text or this section or concept? Okay, this is a large block of text, but again, look at how the student is parsing her literature. She grouped the texts from the 90s and demonstrated their relevance. Here she's grouping texts from the 2000s, 2010s. This text provides valuable insight because of this reason. Notice how the student has also made it very clear through her language that she understands this was a journal special issue. This was an edited book. This was, what else do we have? A group of, a compilation of essays by well-known curators. Don't just say it's a text. This text, that text, that text. This is a journal article. This is an introduction to a book. Because you are introducing the source. It's important to also list. If you look at the final sentence, she says, other studies providing outlines for my inquiry into curatorial strategies include this author, this date, this author, this date, this author, this. So she's giving that overview. To what end? They will be consulted in order to position cultural curatorial approaches within the broader curatorial sphere. Remember, always, why are you looking at these texts? How is it going to help your study? Let your final sentence always bring it back to its relevance to your project. So do you see in this paragraph, she's highlighted key ones that she's introduced with titles, with a brief summary, and then a demonstrated relevance. But then there are other texts that are going to be of subsidiary relevance. Remember, 10 to 15 texts. This is PhD, so it's more. You see how she's highlighted like 3, and then she's also included others under that same subsection. This is 20th century curating. Oh, sorry, 2010s curating. Okay. Okay, finally. Here's a section now on feminist art curating. Look at from the middle. Here, this is, if we just read the sentence, while not focusing directly on sexual violence, they nevertheless offer valuable insights into wide-ranging occurrences within feminist curating within which my topic is situated. Often you're not going to find the thing that is directly on your subject, because of course your subject is supposed to be novel. So how is it partially relevant? How is it partially addressing your question? And how do you acknowledge that? So you say, well, while it's not directly addressing blah, blah, my topic, blah, blah, it is nonetheless relevant because of blah, blah, blah. Remember that the student we saw, she had 3 sections. This is a brief one, just looking again at how you're phrasing, how you're writing. You know, the final point was how to write the literature review. We're looking at writing it. Okay, so here, for example, again, look past the actual subject, look at the structuring. The literature on socially engaged art will be employed to delineate a guideline for the social dimensions of sexual violence exhibitions. To what end? To what end are you using these texts? She stated it. So these include seminal texts. Remember we were talking about doing the detective work of finding the original text, the primary sources. Seminal texts. Nicholas Bourriard's Relational Aesthetics from 1998. Remember in the previous section, she highlighted like 2 or 3. So again here, she's highlighted 1. This is the most important text. Other key texts. She's ranked them. She's not said the first one is this, the second one is this, the third one is this. But she's spotlighted the key text, and then she's also introduced other texts in her overview. So other key texts on socially engaged art include this one and this one and this one. The theories in this one contribute towards conceptualizing framework, blah, blah, blah. To what end? Okay. Oh, yes, yeah, that is the end of the slideshow. So we are slightly ahead of our allotted 90 minutes. Is there a slide you'd like me to go back to? Or I'm just going to stop sharing in the meantime, and you can let me know if there is a slide that you want. I would like to hear from you guys if you would like to talk, or if you would like to ask anything. If you are in the process of writing a literature review for your proposal, if you're in the process of dissertation, if there is something that you're confused about with your topic and you would like to share, if you'd like feedback, as we've seen, you need to be specific. So I've been trying to show you actual examples of how it works in practice. And if you want to try to now take it into your own project, if you have anything on your screen or any questions you'd like to share, I'm here. Or if there is a slide that you'd like me to go back to, you can also let me know.
Thank you so much, Dr. Irene, for such an informative session. I have enabled everyone's mic so they can just raise their hands and you can give them a go ahead. And they are also allowed to use the chat box so they can type their questions on the chat box. Yeah.
Yes, I see. I think someone's Nesmira is busy typing. I've stopped sharing so I can see the chat box again.
All right, no problem.
So earlier you mentioned that there was a limit of 18 months. Is it 18 months to complete the study or 18 months for the proposal? 18 months for the study. So 2 years for your whole master's project. 6 months usually devoted to the proposal. Thereafter, 18 months to complete the study. So I don't know what you guys know. If I'm now saying something that you're very familiar with, we're moving slightly beyond just the scope of what we're talking about here. But you write your proposal and then you submit it to the FHDC. They give you the go-ahead to actually do the project. So the proposal is not doing the project. It's like the preparation. It's creating the roadmap for doing the project. Usually it depends on the department and your supervisor. And like I know I really push my students to get if it's a master's, to get their proposal submitted to the FHDC either in May or June. So that will be 4 months or 6 months. If you're still busy doing it, that means your next date that you're working with, unless you're part-time. Okay, so if someone is part-time, you're on a different timeline. We can talk about that just very briefly. You are probably going to be submitting, like I think Nesmira says she's working on her proposal. You'll be submitting on the 7th of August in preparation for the next FHDC meeting, which is, I think, on like the 21st of August. The agenda closes earlier than everything is sent out, because the FHDC is about more than just proposals, but proposals are a big part of it. Your proposal has to go to a reviewer who will create a report, a response, a recommendation to the committee. If you are part-time, you have 3 years to complete. Part-time students will usually submit their proposals by the end of the first year. Quite often in PhD, the students who might be working and not on scholarships, maybe mature students, people have come back. They often do PhDs part-time, so that would have like 5 years to do a PhD. For a master's part-time, you've got 3 years. You usually need to have that clarified as you register to start with. That's something one doesn't necessarily realize. Like recently I had a student who registered full-time, and don't ask them details of their personal life. Turned out she was actually working full-time and thought she could do a master's full-time. A master's is a job. It's a bit of a jump. Sometimes, you're in the same place, maybe you're in the same department, but all of a sudden, rather than just being like a student, an undergraduate student, you are now a postgraduate student. And it's like you are working a job. You have agency around your actual topic. That's, just creating a topic is really difficult. That's why it takes 6 months just to come up with a question and to substantiate it. But you are now in charge of your own project. And that's a jump from undergrad, even when you are in the same department, seeing the same people. Yeah, it's not the same. So I was saying that, yeah, the students that I had at master's level registered full time, and she's now, this is her second year, and she's like, I can't. She works full time, she's falling behind, she's freaking out. So then her registration was changed to part time. So she has 3 years to complete. University gets sticky. They don't like that. So it's kind of up to you to usually have an understanding. I'm able to work on this full time, so I'm registering full time. Or sometimes also last things come up. You can sometimes take abeyances. That's another thing that happens. There was a tragedy in the family. You had a baby. Something happened. You might take 6 months off. So you don't just disappear, because your supervisor will try to find you, and then the academic admin will try to find you. But you say, I need an abeyance. So you get like an official 3 months, 6 months off, and then you come back. So even though maybe you took 3 years to complete, you were actually only studying for 2 of those years. Anyway, yeah. Anybody else have anything? Well, if there aren't any more questions, maybe Rebahili, we call it a day. I'm going to put my email in the chat box. If there is something you would like to ask that you think of later, the slides will be available. I realize I did not put my email address on the slides, but you are welcome to contact me if there's something that I could maybe help you with. I mean, I'm not going to give you supervisory input that might conflict with your actual supervisor, but if there's something you'd like to query or to expand upon that we have been talking here about the structuring of your context or your introduction and your literature review, I'm very happy to speak to you or to answer an email.
All right, Dr. Irene, I think if we do not have any more questions, we can wrap up the session. On behalf of the RCD unit, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, more especially you, our facilitator, that took their time to prepare for this session. We are truly honored. I can see there's also reactions on the chat box.
I hope it was helpful.
Yes, it was definitely helpful. Thank you so much, Prof.
You're welcome. Okay, bye-bye, everybody. Enjoy your research leave.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.